Once upon a time, in an era known as the 1990s, a man with a saxophone signed a bill. This bill intended to reduce the prevalence of military-style firearms, which broadly included assault rifles, some shotguns, pistols, and who knows what the hell else, proved that we are in one of the less optimal timelines by manifesting into existence. This law would have ripple effects throughout the American arms industry. At home, the spirit of the law would be viciously violated without remorse. However, when it came to imports, more complications would arise. And here we have two representative examples of what countries that were major arms exporters were trying to do to enter the US market at the time. One example from Russia, another from China. And so with the stage set, welcome to Rose Rambles, Com-Block Assault Weapons Ban Showdown. And as an added treat, I thought I'd include each of the countries' respective ammunition imports as well. This box of the Chinese ammunition actually does date back from the 1990s. This Russian ammunition is a lot more modern. But either way, they're both the same thing. They're 20 rounds of the exact same cartridge, 7.62 by 39mm. Very noticeably right off the bat, the Russian packaging is a lot more efficient. It's taller, but not quite twice as tall, but it takes up less than half the length of the Chinese box for the same quantity of ammunition. That might not sound impressive, but for something that has to be shipped internationally, this is a big deal, and it reflects heavily on the end price of your ammo. To be more precise, the Wolf box has a volume of 7.97 inches cubed, and the China Sports box has a volume of 10.74 inches cubed. That's 34% more. That's not insignificant. Since most American gunners will probably be familiar with the Russian Animal brands, we'll look at the Wolf first. It's an interesting box. I noticed that it has both a modern mutagenic hazard warning, which, I mean, fair enough, and a bit of an understatement. This is probably a bit of an aside, but I believe it was Louis Shosho, the guy that invented the Shosha light machine gun, the model 1918. He actually died from inhaling too much GSR because he was designing the weapon in a poorly ventilated bunker to maintain its secrecy. And it didn't go well for him, so, you know, don't shoot in poorly ventilated ranges. Anyway, interestingly, it also tells you to be wary of excess lubrication in the barrel. Never really had a problem with that. Being honest with you, this calls itself performance ammunition, and it is not. This is the cheapest, lowest quality stuff that you'll generally find on the market, aside from some kind of sketchy hand loads. Opening it up, though, you'll find they're perfectly pretty enough. If you've ever seen someone with a cringy bullet necklace, it's probably made out of one of these. Steel-cased FMJ bullets. Moving back to the Great Wall of Norinco, the next immediately obvious difference is that these, while still being 122 grain, are soft point rather than FMJ bullets. These do not have the mutagenic warning or anything like it, because, frankly, this box was manufactured before anything like that was on the books. They do, however, completely disregard any warnings about excess lubrication in the barrel. Only having obstructions in there is worrisome. I don't know, makes sense to me. They also promise that this ammunition is designed and produced to give the utmost accuracy and power, using quality powder, cases, and bullets to give the best results at all ranges. Opening her up, we're already bearing witness to the efficient packaging with this styrofoam block, and ooh, I don't know about that, guys. Yeah, let's get that close to the camera. I don't think our soft point survived too well. Other than that, and a somewhat iffily staked primer in there. These do shoot. They smell. I've never chronographed them. I only had one other box, and I don't intend to shoot this one. I don't recommend buying this ammunition if you see it, to be perfectly honest, unless you're a cartridge collector like me. Looking at them side by side, you can really see how that soft point has blunted. They are still roughly the same. One thing that I was mentioning, and I don't know how well you're going to be able to notice, is how badly staked this primer is. The Russian one is nice and concise and even. This Chinese one is at a bit of an angle. It's more deeply recessed and slightly canted to the side. Should work fine, just something worth noting. Moving on to the rifles themselves, they both share a very similar ideology. They both started off with a military arm, and they vastly civilianized it, and then made it meet import requirements for the United States. Both of these rifles are sitting pretty much right as imported stock, with the slight exception of a paint job done to this Saiga here, which, in honor of its Russian spirit, was conceived and executed while blind drunk. But I won't let that groggy cloud in place of a memory affect its performance in this review. The eagle-eyed may also notice the lack of a bayonet or cleaning rod on this rifle. That is also as it came out of the box. I don't know what to say about that one. I'm pretty sure it was supposed to have them. This one just didn't. Getting down to the on-paper stats, the Saiga is sitting at 37 3/8 inches long, and the Chinese Simonov here is sitting at 41 1/4. That does make it kind of noticeably longer, but not terribly so. The Saiga, however, is sitting at noticeably taller, at almost 7 inches tall at the magazine to sights, versus the Simonov, which is sitting at just over 5. To go along with that, the AK has a higher height over bore at 2 inches versus the Simonov's 1.5 inches, which is a definite point in its favor. A point that it then immediately loses as the AK comes equipped with an optics rail, while the Simonov just doesn't. Much more noticeable is the weight difference. The AK is sitting at 7.2 pounds, meanwhile the SKS is weighing in all the way at 9. And you know, that makes the SKS here a quarter again as heavy as the AK. That's... maybe you can argue that's a good thing for recoil mitigation, but I don't know if I buy into that personally. Moving on to the assault weapons ban isms, both the muzzles of these weapons are completely bare. There are no muzzle devices on them at all, as was the import requirement. Then we have the magazines. The magazine requirements were they could not accept magazines of greater than 10 rounds. That means it couldn't just come with a magazine of 10 rounds. It could not take a standard factory magazine that is currently on the market that was greater than 10 rounds. So, in both cases, in the AK's case, it couldn't take its regular magazines. The Simonov's case, they normally don't have a conventionally detachable magazine, and frankly, this one doesn't either. To show you what I mean, let's take the Saiga magazine here, which is, for all intents and purposes, a Kalashnikov magazine. The geometry of it is slightly different, so this rifle will not take a standard AK magazine, and an AK will not take these magazines. They are unique to this, and therefore these 10-rounders fit the requirement. The SKS is a bit more contrived. For those familiar with the original SKS, they'll notice that this is not exactly the magazine that came equipped with it, and that's accurate. This is, well, kind of was a 10-round AK magazine that's gone through some modifications. The SKS was never designed to have, like, a detachable, combat replaceable, like, disposable style magazine. Instead, it was a stripper clip fed firearm, and this one still is, and I don't have stripper clips, but that's probably the ideal way to load this, because the magazines are a bit interesting, and changing them is a bit glacial. To start off with, you cannot change the magazines while the bolt is closed. It has to be opened. Then you pull this latch back, which pops it out, and then you have this guy, who has a bit of a chin problem. There are aftermarket magazines which include a magazine release on the magazine body itself, which interacts with this kind of pushback latch here on them. But can you imagine fitting something like this, especially something with this with an additional lever on the back, into a piece of web gear, carrying these around? No. If you're trying to be serious about this in any way, shape, or form, the stripper clips are the only way to go forward with this gun. This is not a detachable magazine rifle, not really. Though to slightly make up for that, the SKS does actually lock open while it's empty, unlike the AK, which rather famously has a bit of a deficiency in that department. Continuing further back, both of these rifles have a semi-pistol grip traditional rifle style stock. The SKS always had that. The AK did not. Its pistol grip has been removed and the stock dramatically altered. But despite that, you might think that this would have the worst ergonomics, and that's absolutely not the case. This rifle is way more comfortable in the hand. It's only about 1/8 of an inch thinner, but it's almost 1/2 an inch less deep, and that's a huge difference in the hand. Frankly, this Norinco is a fat bitch, and it feels like it. You need some real gorilla paws in order to get all the way around it, and it just feels chunky and kind of weak and lame. It's workable, like you can shoot it. It doesn't really affect your ability to use the weapon, to be perfectly honest. And outside of just user comfort and kind of, I don't know, ergonomic sex appeal, it doesn't matter, but subjectively, this is kind of gross, dude. Moving past the chunky wrist on these rifles, despite the overall length difference, they have pretty much the exact same length of pull. And while the Norinco here has this sort of Monte Carlo style stock with a raised cheek pad, the comb is pretty much the same height on both of them, and it doesn't really make any difference. I don't feel this really while shooting, but in terms of cheek weld and sight acquisition and like shoulder pocket fit, both of these rifles are pretty much fine. So another modification that this stock kind of made necessary was moving the trigger group on the AK. The Saiga has it coming out what was originally the pistol grip slot, and the original trigger group slot has been covered with this little panel here. This is a little annoying since it does make mag changes a little slower. You can't do the slide and rock, but ultimately it doesn't make that big of a difference. But what that does mean is the AK safety, which is already not the most convenient to access, is now just completely out of the way of my right hand. Like, firing grip, that's not happening. This is either breaking the grip or rocking over with the left. Meanwhile, the SKS safety, it's so close to actually being decent, but it is better. This is the fire position where it's down like this. Safe is up here, and I can almost disengage it from a normal firing grip, but I do have to break my thumb over this way in order to make that happen, because this is just so wide, and there's no recess for your finger to kind of slip in and catch this thing. It is better, but it's not amazing. Since we're talking about triggers, the AK trigger has a fair amount of take-up, but a fairly clean break. Meanwhile, the SKS has just about the same amount of take-up, but then a fair amount of creep. That covers most of the major modifications from the baseline patterns of the AK and the SKS that these rifles represent, but just moving along in the comparison, just the differences between the two rifles and their relative benefits versus disadvantages. For one, we have the dust cover. The AK dust cover, when used with the safety, is pretty decent. It's not perfect. You can probably see down there's a bit of a gap underneath all of this, and the bolt carrier is still exposed and can move. But for the most part, you're not going to get much in there, at the very least. Hopefully not, unless your car started running mud tests. Which is a lot more than I can say for our Chinese Simonov here, which has a dedication to open-air ventilation that I haven't seen since the game Brink. The dust cover is a component that exists at the back of the receiver. It's more of a receiver cap than anything else. The bolt carrier is completely exposed during operation. Even the bolt, well, I guess that's the extractor, is fully visible. Anything will get in this gun. The rails are just exposed. If any dust or debris gets in there, this will start to jam it up and make it nasty. This is not a very excellent adverse conditions gun. Let's talk serviceability. How easy are these guns to field strip? Let's start with the Simonov, which will become obvious why as we do it. It has this receiver cover and this kind of rotating pin as our first step. You pop that out, pull this guy off, which is a rather kind of lethally sharp piece of machined steel. Then you have your recoil spring, then your bolt carrier, and your bolt come out, like so. A mistake you'll want to avoid is to remove the magazine at this step. If you do, make sure you reinstall it before you put the bolt back in, and I'll show you why you want to do that later. Moving along to the AK, you'll see how these both really show that they shared the same Soviet DNA. I'm going to start by removing the magazine this time, because that's just best practice and the AK doesn't care. Then, you take off the dust cover by pushing this detent into the back. Your spring comes out. And then once again, your bolt carrier and bolt come right out the back. Looking at these parts in isolation, you can really see how the AK took inspiration from the SKS, but improved upon it dramatically, in my opinion at least. Though once again, to concede a point to the SKS, the bolt and bolt carrier group on the SKS are significantly lighter than they are on the AK. That's largely because the AK is a long stroke gas piston. As you can see, it extends all the way up through the gas tube, up here to the gas port at the top. Meanwhile, the SKS is a short stroke piston, so its piston is actually still contained. You can see it right down in there. It just moves a short distance back and then kicks this the rest of the way. As a result, this is a much lighter system. Combined with the heavier weight of the rifle and the lower reciprocating mass, it probably is a softer rifle to shoot. I will be honest, I have not subjectively noticed much of a difference. Both rifles are very controllable and very gentle, but if you are sensitive, the SKS might be slightly easier. And if you're looking to counter that point by looking at these recoil springs and saying, hey, look, the AK has a longer bolt travel path, so therefore it should be the lighter recoiling gun, this is unfortunately another point of similarity between these two guns. They have almost the exact same bolt travel distance. The AK might have like a 1/4 inch extra space, but I don't think that's enough to make any appreciable or even really any extant difference. The reason for the longer spring is, for one, the AK spring sits up in the bolt carrier group way deeper than the Simonov does, which only goes in a fairly short distance. And then beyond that, the AK spring also retains tension to make this detent button work, while the Simonov spring pretty much sits relaxed while the bolt is closed. Moving along to major mechanical differences, the SKS here is a tilting bolt design, which means when the bolt carrier group is shoved all the way forward, the bolt drops down into this position, then locks against a wedge in the receiver. Right here. You can probably see a bit of the shiny wear from where it's been locking up. The AK, meanwhile, uses a cammed rotating bolt, where these two surfaces here lock up against lugs in the receiver back here. And while I know that means some of the AR fans out there are going to immediately jump and assume the AK will be more accurate as a result, if you look at the actual engagement surface on your locking surfaces, the SKS actually has quite a lot more. The AK only has 2 lugs, versus an AR's like many. And as a result, this doesn't make any real difference, I don't think. What certainly is a major important difference, however, is the firing pins. The SKS is a free-floated, freely moving firing pin versus the AK, which is spring-loaded. This is entirely critical. And it's now time for me to tell you a bit of a tragic truth about our Chinese friend here. The Saiga is a dedicated semi-automatic sporting rifle. The Norinco is a dedicated semi-automatic sporting rifle with an optional and highly randomized up to 10 round burst feature. Unfortunately, it is the rifle that decides how optional it is. This is a problem that has shown up again and again over years now, and it's never resolved itself. I don't know if it's a problem with this thing binding up, perhaps when the rifle gets too hot. There doesn't seem to be any real rhyme or reason. Sometimes it's the first round of the day that sets it off, and other times it'll go months or years without doing it at all. But clearly, something is out of spec with this firing pin. This is actually not even its first firing pin. This is the second one. So I'm not sure what's going on. It might be an issue with the Chinese rifles in general. I'm not sure. The Chinese cartridges did have the primers recessed deeper than the Russian ones. So it might be just a series of stack tolerances that are turning against me. But as it stands, this optional 10 up to 10 round burst, frankly, it usually jams after 2 or 3, feature means that this gun is not going out to the range with me anymore. It hasn't for many years. It probably won't again, to be perfectly honest. It's going to stay in this configuration. Meanwhile, the AK has been the gun that I've taken new shooters out to learn on for over a decade now. Back when I was in colleges, I was picking out 18-year-old freshmen and putting them on this rifle, and it was a great time. I wouldn't do that in a million years with this. Reassembly on both guns is as simple as the inverse is disassembly. Bolt and carrier go in. Spring follows up behind. In the AK's case, you have to slide it into its little detent. And then the dust covers go on, which just kind of slides up into place and it gets smacked down. Done! And it's the same process for our friend Simon here. You just take your bolt and carrier, you line them up down into the rails, push them forward, put your spring in behind it, make sure this keyed pin is up and out the way, and you slide this guy in over the top, get it down, in there, push it forward. Then if it's pushed into the right spot, there is still a little bit of spring tension. You can get this down all the way through, rotate it into place, and then, oh no. I did say this was a mistake now, didn't I? To not put the magazine back in before the bolt. Let's go over why. I'm just proving it's not the latch's fault. It will not see if the bolt's closed. It needs to be opened. And now, my friends, we get to the curse of the bolt hold open and magazine catch, and I guess the reason why those magazines I mentioned earlier with the big lever on the back of them exist. The bolt won't lock back unless a magazine is inserted. It's empty. The hold open has no manual access on the outside at all. So, in order to put a magazine into a gun where the bolt is forward, you kind of require 3 hands in a table. If anyone remembers the old Afghan squat reloads from like 10 years ago, this is living that meme. You have to brace the gun against yourself by holding it on the bolt. Then you slide this up, and you kind of gotta figure out a way of pushing the bottom in while also changing this. And then, there you go. Ta-da! Just don't bother, man. These even fit in web gear. There's no comparison. Just treat this thing like the obsolete World War II relic it is. Get stripper clips or top load it and leave the magazine in place. Don't bother trying to pull these out. Even the aftermarket magazines that make that better are still terrible. There's nothing redeeming about this system. And yeah, I know this is just an SKS thing, but are you fucking kidding me? It locks on the barrel. While neither of these rifles are champions of barrel harmonics, this is a terrible design. So in conclusion, the SKS with its slightly longer barrel should have a flatter trajectory. Its better bolt lockup means they'll have stronger action. Its more convenient safety means they'll get into and out of action faster. Its top-loaded magazine means it's extra convenient to load while prone. And it's even shorter than the AK, so it's better to fire while prone. Clearly, this is the optimal rifle for the rifleman in need. Okay, maybe that's only what Mao would say, and yeah, the AK is the clear superior rifle here. There's no competition, really. And the thing is, the Chinese were making AKs at the very same time, so why the hell would they think this is what people would want?
You have to work pretty hard to get inside the heads of Chinese military leaders to understand why they thought that the AK-47 was a lousy weapon.
Yeah, that we do, Professor Clower. That we do.